Well, I didn't mean to diss Castaneda as a metaphor maker. No, I think The Teachings of Don Juan is a tremendous book. I'm very suspicious of some of his later stuff. It's interesting what you said, because you know the famous crow transformation in The Teachings of Don Juan has been traced, and I'm sure many of you know this book, has been traced to George MacDonald's book, Through the Gates of the Silver Key. And George MacDonald was a friend of Evans Vance. So I think what we're getting here is a mining of late 19th century English folklore by Castaneda. Nevertheless, the presence of these small entities has been a part of folklore for a long, long time. Elementals, types. What puzzles me, I guess, is I've spent a lot of time in this magical literature and art historical area, and the descriptions don't quite match. I can't quite convince myself that the sprites, the afrits, the nixies, the jinns, that these creatures of the woodland fae are the same thing. Or I don't know whether I am contaminated by an early love of science fiction and, well, again, close but no banana. All these popular aliens that are running around, you know, the Whitley Streboids and all these things, are much more mundane than what I encountered. I mean, what I encountered was terrifyingly not human, terrifyingly alien, and I just do not quite get. And Madame Blavatsky was into it, and they're always saying, you know, I don't know, they're very sort of cut and dried about it. And when I encounter an extraterrestrial alien or a creature from another dimension, the main thing that's happening for me is the implications are blowing my mind. They seem totally immune to the implications. Yeah. Well, a sufficient amount of DMT is smoked west of the Pacific Coast Highway that it wouldn't surprise me if the writers of Star Trek, were onto this. Yes, what is not much talked about, the part of the experience which is anomalous, and maybe people who know more about magical literature than I do can correct me, but what the elves are really interested in is this stuff which I call visible language. That's the whole point of the encounter, is to exhibit it and to get you to do it. Well, now, first of all, think for a minute about ordinary language. It's really weird. It's the weirdest thing we do. I mean, if you were looking for the thumbprint of God on creation, human language would be a good candidate. Because, look, we're supposed to be some kind of animal who just went a little further than the next guy. But to get out of that Shakespeare and Milton is a pretty amazing accomplishment, hardly to speak of the mathematical languages that we generate. So something happened. Some people think only 35,000 years ago. Imagine if that's true. I mean, I don't care. Some people say 150,000 years ago. But to speak, to take small mouth noises and to turn them into signifiers for symbols and relationships, in spite of some people's enthusiasm for cetaceans and dolphins, I just am not overwhelmed by the evidence. I mean, to me, you know, it is a miracle to be able to speak poetry. It is a miracle. I mean, when Coleridge wrote, "And south and south and southward we fled, and it grew wondrous cold, and ice mast high went floating by as green as emerald." I mean, that's language. And it's magic. And we have a fascination, then we also paint. then we sculpt, then we write, then we create electronic databases, then film, television. Clearly, what we want to do is we want to communicate visually. And these things are saying there's a way to do it. Do it! And I don't understand. Do we all have to be loaded on DMT all the time? Can you learn to do this? The gentleman who asked about dreams, here's a piece of information that is critical in this jigsaw puzzle. If you have smoked DMT at any time in the past, it is possible to have a dream in which people are running around and you're checked into the Mars Hotel and the luggage is lost and this and that, and in the middle of all that, someone drags out a little glass pipe and hands it to you. It will happen. It will happen in the dream. Not a memory, not a simulacrum. It will really happen. Well, now, to me, that's an amazing piece of data, because what it's saying is you can do it on the natch. You may have to be dead asleep, but still, on the natch, this can be done. And the lucid dreamers, the biofeedback people, the people who claim these wonderful things that you can do with sleep and dream and programming, I challenge them. Teach people to have DMT dreams in their sleep. And then let's figure out how to drag that puppy into the light so that we can do it at will on the natch. Just one second. And one thing that I have come to believe is that we remember no more than 5% of our dreams, and it's the most mundane 5%. I think, and there's scientific evidence to support this. Remember I said DMT is in the human brain? Well, it concentrates in the human cerebrospinal fluid on a 24-hour cycle, and it reaches its peak of concentration between 3 and 4 a.m. in most people. That's when the deep REM sleep is happening. When you give somebody DMT, they lay back, they close their eyes, and the way you, the guide, the sitter, I don't like the word guide, you, the sitter, the way you can tell that they're getting off is their eyes dart wildly behind their closed eyelids. It means they're in REM. They're in REM sleep. They've been immediately shoved into deep dreaming. So I believe that what DMT is doing in normal human metabolism is it mediates the descent, the spiral descent into dream, and that every single night we are reunited with the boundaryless oceanic mystery of being that we are so frantic about in waking life and so distant from. And that if we could in fact just engineer a drug that would allow us to remain fully conscious as we drift deeper into dream, we would need no other drug or substance. That's where we want to go. And I think that's where history is headed. What the Archaic Revival is about is a revivification of the Aboriginal dream time. We are going to live in the imagination. We are preparing to decamp from three-dimensional space. I mean, yes, the earth is the cradle of the human race, but you don't stay in the cradle forever, you know. And it's something like going into dream. It's something like taking the hyper-technical virtual reality internet head of the snake and inserting the shamanic, late Paleolithic, ecstatic, orgiastic tail of the snake, and then you have the Ouroboros completion. Then you have the quintessence, and the work is complete, and history ends, and we live then in the light of the stone made manifest. Well, it definitely has something, this mystery that we're talking about, it definitely has something to do with sound and the magical role of sound. Ayahuasca is a sort of different way of sectioning the DMT experience, because ayahuasca is orally active, unfolds over hours, is not as dramatic as DMT, but the people who use ayahuasca as a ritual on a weekly basis, what their practice consists of is they take this stuff and then they sing. They sing like crazy, and then when they stop singing and people light a cigarette and take a leak and so forth, and you're listening to these conversations, you hear people say stuff about the shaman like, I like the part with the olive drab and the silver, but when it became magenta and moved toward orange, I thought he was over the top. You think, what kind of a criticism of a song is that? And the answer is, sound has become a visually beheld medium. Yes, so the reason I'm interested in something as techno-nerdy as virtual reality is because you could program a virtual reality so that when you went, an iridescent blue line would be keyed to that to descend into the space. And I'm very interested in environmental and electronic simulations of psychedelic states. But we're not going to do better than the psychedelics. If we can do as well, it will be a miracle. I mean, you see more beauty in a first wave of psilocybin than the human race has produced in the past 5,000 years. And who are you, you know? Yes. No, I promised this guy, Bennu, and I felt his flash of loathing. I hadn't considered that sounds possible. I mean, we're definitely coming to some enormous cusp, and whether you think it's the cusp of cusps or just a big cusp, it's hard to say. Somebody faxed me. I got a fax right before I came here. I don't know who sent it to me. It was just an anonymous fax, but in huge letters it said, when you strip away the hype, it's just another concrescence. Yes. It's interesting, and that's a good question. The answer is yes and no. Obviously, there is hardly anything more personal than a psychedelic experience. It is a kind of summation of who you are, and it's viewed through the filters of your personality. Nevertheless, when you put a whole bunch of DMT trips together, certain things seem to emerge. My notion, coming at it from a sort of Jungian attitude, is if we had to say what is the archetype of DMT, the archetype is the circus. It's the circus. And let me say why. First of all, a circus is a place of wild, exotic activity. And clowns you don't have a circus without clowns. And clowns are wonderful for children. A circus is a wonderful place for a child. DMT, there is something very, very weirdly childlike about it in a very unchildish way. Some of you may know the 52nd fragment of Heraclitus, where he says, the Aeon is a child at play with colored balls. The Aeon is the child that you encounter in the Elf Dome. But the circus has other connotations than simply the three rings and the clowns. Eros is present, entwined with Thanatos, in the form of the nearly naked lady in the tiny spangled costume who is working without nets, hanging by her teeth up near the top of the big tent. And personally, my earliest experience of Eros was that lady in the tiny spangled costume. I was so small, I was wrapped up in something, and being held, and I was horny as hell. So there's that, and then there is also radiating off from the central ring the freak show, the goat-faced boy, the lady in the bottle, and the three-toed alligator kid, and all of that. That's there. The wiggy, weird, kinky, strange, alien stuff. And then, if you think about the archetype, not so much of the circus, but of the carnival represents a breakthrough from another dimension, because you live in some jerkwater town, in some, I almost said Iowa, but some town, and it's like normal. And then the carnival comes to town, and children are told, you can't stay out and play. The carny people are in town. And what does it mean? Well, they may fuck differently than we do. They may steal things. They're not like us. They've had more than one marriage, some of them. And then the carnival people are there, and the hoochie-coochie dancers and the whole thing, and then they fold it up and they go away, just like a DMT trip. And every little boy and girl in the world worth their salt wants to join the circus, of course, and go away with the tattooed lady and the tigers and all that. So it is the archetype of the circus. So then I've seen many, many people take DMT, and some get what I get, which is it's sort of gone beyond the circus. It's the circus, but the circus as presented on Zenebel-Ganubi Prime or something like that. But one woman who was an anthropologist who I think got a sub-threshold dose, she had a very interesting trip because it was a light trip, but with no prompting from me. She said, I was at a carnival midway, but it was after hours, and there was nobody there, and there were just those ice cream, those square papers for holding ice cream were just blowing in the wind and getting caught in chain-link fences. It was like a sub-threshold dose. Well, then if she'd done more, she would have arrived there 8 hours earlier when the thing was happening, and if she'd done yet another toke, it would have moved off into the zone of the truly weird.